Welcome, my friends, to another gathering of minds where film and literature intertwine, where we let stories unfold not only on screen, but also within us. I always think of you, those who carry a love for narratives the way some carry well-worn books in their pockets, pages folded and corners torn, ready to revisit at any moment. That's who this channel is for, and why these conversations feel more like late-night exchanges between friends than anything else. If you're new here, I would love for you to join us. Go ahead and like and subscribe, but think of it not as a formality, more like pulling up a chair at a table where we'll talk long and deep about the power of stories. And as always, let me be absolutely clear. What we do here is not a conventional review, not the checklist of performances, plot points, and ratings that you'd find elsewhere. No, this is a theoretical excavation, a critical analysis shaped for lovers of literature and meaning, where we use cinema as a way to explore life itself. Tonight's exploration begins with Wrath of Man, 2021, a title that already speaks volumes before a single frame passes. Even the name bristles with energy, suggesting not just anger, but a primal force, the kind of emotion that doesn't merely flicker, but burns through everything it touches. I remember when I first encountered it, not as an action film, which is how it was largely marketed, but as a meditation. It struck me not as a story about bullets and armored trucks, though those are there, but about grief, vengeance, and the fragile line between justice and obsession. There was something Shakespearean about it, something ancient, a fury that felt as old as the plays of Euripides, as mythic as Aeschylus. Watching it, I found myself drifting into personal reflection, thinking about the ways loss reshapes a person, how rage can calcify in a purpose, and how the hunger for retribution is never as clean as we want it to be. The story, on its surface, seems simple, almost deceptively so. We meet a man who joins a Los Angeles cash truck company, the kind of place where armed guards sit behind the heavy doors of reinforced vehicles, transporting money through streets where greed and desperation are always waiting in ambush. His name is new to the crew, his demeanor stoic, his skills sharp but understated. At first, he appears ordinary, another recruit taking a job, fitting into the dangerous monotony of protecting wealth that isn't his. But then comes the first robbery. The doors are forced, the guards pinned, weapons raised, and in that moment this man reveals something extraordinary. He is not merely trained. He is lethal, precise, cold in a way that terrifies not only the attackers but his own colleagues. In minutes, the assault is quelled, bodies strewn, the crew left stunned by his efficiency. Who is he? Where did he come from? Why does he move like someone with nothing left to lose? That is the mystery at the heart of the film. What begins as a straightforward action premise, new recruit proves himself under fire, unfolds into a layered narrative that stretches backward and forward, revealing not only who this man is but what drives him. His past is scarred, his present a performance, his every action charged with purpose. And this is where the story moves beyond genre, where it becomes something closer to myth. He is not just a guard, not just an employee. He is a father, broken by tragedy, a man whose child was stolen from him in violence, whose grief has sharpened into a weapon. The armored trucks, the robberies, the cash, they are settings but not the story. The story is his wrath, his descent into the underworld of crime and betrayal to find those responsible and bring them into the fire of his vengeance. The structure of a narrative is fascinating, fractured like memory itself. We do not march forward in a straight line, but spiral, circling back to the same events from different perspectives. A robbery seen once as chaos is shown again with context, new angles revealing secrets we did not suspect. Time becomes elastic, shifting back and forth, echoing the way grief distorts perception. When you've lost someone, days stretch into years, memories collapse into the present. Everything circles around the wound. The film mirrors this experience through its storytelling, refusing to move neatly, demanding that we sit inside the fracture until we understand it. And here lies one of the reasons it resonated with me personally. Loss, whether of a loved one or even of something less tangible, a dream, a season of life, a sense of certainty, reshapes us. It carves deep lines into our thinking, rearranges our days. I have felt that, though in different form. The way you begin to measure time by before and after, the way every moment seems to bend toward the absence that defines you. Watching this man move through his story, I was reminded of the universality of that fracture. No matter how different the circumstances, grief always demands a reshaping, always leaves behind a silence you cannot ignore. His vengeance may be extreme, but the feeling beneath it, this I understood. The beauty of a narrative, if beauty is the right word, is that it teases us constantly with the promise of revelation. We're shown glimpses of his past, fragments of his loss, shadows of the men who caused it. We're given pieces of the puzzle, each one sharp and jagged, until we begin to see the whole picture emerge. It is not about money. It is not even about the robberies themselves. It is about grief crystallized into obsession, about a man who has lost the center of his world and who refuses to stop until the scales are balanced. This obsession is terrifying, but also strangely noble in the way ancient tragedy is noble. We do not necessarily root for him to succeed, nor do we want him to fail. We simply watch, mesmerized, as he follows the inexorable path laid before him, as though fate itself were pulling the strings. There are moments when the story reminds us that vengeance is never clean. Every act of violence ripples outward, dragging others into its wake. The armored trucks become coffins on wheels, men trapped in cycles of violence they did not create. The villains, too, are not one-dimensional. They are desperate, flawed, driven by greed and resentment. They are human, which makes their cruelty all the more chilling. By the time a man finds his way to the truth, we have already felt the weight of what it cost him to get there. His victory, if one can call it that, feels less like triumph and more like inevitability, the kind of ending that leaves you silent rather than cheering. That is why the story works so well as a tease of themes larger than itself. It gives us action, yes, but action layered with meaning, with resonance. It asks us to consider not only what vengeance does to those who deserve it, but what it does to the one who carries it. It asks whether wrath can ever satisfy grief, whether balance can ever truly be restored when something so precious has been taken. And it leaves us with an unease that lingers long after the credits fade. For me, that is the brilliance of the film. It masquerades as a straightforward thriller, but reveals itself to be a meditation on something much older, much deeper. It is about grief, wrath, inevitability, themes as ancient as the tragedies we still read in literature classes, as resonant as the questions we carry in our own lives. Watching it, I felt less like I was seeing an action film and more like I was witnessing a fable dressed in modern clothes, a myth retold in the language of bullets and armored steel. And so, as we begin our deeper exploration of this story together, I want you to carry that thought with you. Remember that beneath the spectacle lies allegory. Beneath the action lies meditation. Beneath the vengeance lies grief. This is not simply entertainment, though it entertains. It is a mirror held to the fragility of our lives, to the intensity of our emotions, to the ways we struggle to make sense of loss. And if we can learn to see it that way, to peel back the layers and uncover the themes waiting beneath, then we can find something much richer than action alone. So let us continue forward with curiosity, with patience, with the same devotion we bring to literature. For the story has much to reveal, if we are willing to look closely, to linger in the shadows, and to listen for what it whispers beneath the roar. The story opens not with fanfare, but with a strangely quiet unease. A cash truck moves steadily through the streets of Los Angeles, its steel frame a fortress of ordinary monotony, its drivers speaking in the tone of men who have done this route 100 times before. There is no glory in their work, only repetition. The same stops, the same procedures, the same stretches of road they know too well. But routine is always fragile, and fragility often breaks in silence before the shatter comes. Out of nowhere, an ambush strikes. The air is filled with the sound of weapons and sudden panic. The armored vehicle boxed in, its crew frozen between duty and helplessness. In that moment, we feel how thin the line is between safety and chaos, how quickly order can collapse in a gunfire. It is an opening not meant to dazzle, but to unsettle. And we sense, even before we meet the man who will drive this story, that this world is one where permanence is illusion, where danger bleeds into the everyday. Then he arrives, a man with a face carved from stone, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who does not need to speak to command attention. He introduces himself as a new recruit, just another employee signing on at the cash truck company. The men around him study him with suspicion. He is too calm, too sure, too self-contained. His name is given, but names feel like masks here, and his is no different. The job, on paper, is simple. Protect the money, follow the routes, keep watch for thieves. Yet from the moment he steps into this world, there is the sense that he is not here for wages, not here for monotony. He is here for something else, something coiled and waiting beneath the surface. His first days are awkward, deliberately so. The veterans at the company test him, mocking his quiet demeanor, brushing against him with half-joking hostility. They want to know if he is trustworthy, if he will hold his ground when the bullets come. He does not rise to their bait. He barely reacts at all, watching them with eyes that reveal nothing. The company itself, with its sterile offices and buzzing routines, becomes a character in its own right, an environment of men who live with danger but cope with it through jokes, routines, and weariness. Our new recruit absorbs it all, his silence both shield and weapon. The first robbery comes quickly. The armored truck he rides in is targeted by attackers, armed men whose movements suggest planning, not desperation. The crew panics, guns raised, voices rising with fear. And then the newcomer steps forward. In seconds, the scene transforms. He moves with ruthless precision, taking down the attackers with cold efficiency. There is no hesitation, no wasted motion, no fear. His violence is clean, almost surgical, and when the smoke clears, the others stare at him, not with admiration, but with a creeping dread. He has revealed something about himself, something they cannot understand. This is not the skill of an ordinary man. This is the violence of someone who has lived in blood before, someone who has come here with purpose. From that moment, the whispers begin. Who is he really? Where did he come from? Why would someone with those skills work here, guarding trucks for modest pay? His colleagues dig into his past, but find little. His file is sparse, his story incomplete. He is a shadow, walking among them, revealing just enough to play the part, but never enough to be understood. They begin to treat him with a wary respect, but also a fear that lingers behind their jokes. They know he is dangerous, but they do not know for whom. As days pass, we begin to see glimpses of his inner world. He is not reckless, not one to bask in glory. His violence is not the bravado of a man seeking fame, but the discipline of someone with a singular mission. In conversations that seem casual, his eyes drift, his silences weigh heavier than words. At night, when he is alone, the mask slips. His life is not built on this job. It is driven by grief, by rage, by something stolen from him that cannot be restored. The narrative bends, time folding back on itself. What seemed straightforward suddenly refracts into new angles. We are shown another robbery, one that predates his arrival, one that ended differently, not in survival, but in loss. This is where the story fractures, where the myth beneath the man begins to take shape. He was not always this cold, not always this distant. Once he was a father, and his son was his center. It was on one of these armored truck runs, on an ordinary day that mirrored all the others, that everything was undone. His son was caught in the wrong place, the wrong time, a casualty of violence meant for money but destined to shatter lives. This revelation is not given gently. It comes in fragments, memories, flashbacks, pieces of a puzzle that only make sense when assembled in full. The man we know now, ruthless and impenetrable, was born in that moment. His son's death was the catalyst, the fracture that split his life into before and after. The armored trucks are not merely vehicles of commerce to him. They're the stage of his tragedy, the setting of his wound. His job at the company is not employment. It is infiltration. He has come here not to guard money, but to hunt the men responsible for his son's death. The film, in its structure, mirrors his obsession. It circles events, revisits robberies, rewinds to show us what we missed the first time. It is not a linear march, but a spiral, pulling us deeper into the center of his wrath. Each new robbery, each new ambush, is no longer random. They are pieces of a design, hints of the men who orchestrated his grief. And he watches, waits, draws closer. His colleagues sense that his motives are not aligned with theirs. Some confront him, asking bluntly why he fights with such cold ferocity. He gives them nothing. To them, he is inscrutable, a man defined only by the violence he unleashes when threatened. But to us, who now glimpse his inner fracture, every silence is laden with meaning. He does not explain himself because his explanation is not theirs to carry. It is too heavy, too personal, too consuming. Slowly, the antagonists come into focus. They are not desperate criminals acting on impulse, but disciplined thieves, former soldiers shaped by the same training that forged him. They plan their robberies with military precision, executing them like operations rather than crimes. Their leader is ruthless, but his men are bound together by loyalty and greed. They see armored trucks not as symbols of risk, but as opportunities, targets that carry fortune wrapped in steel. They believe themselves untouchable, their precision a shield. What they do not yet realize is that their precision has collided with another force, one far more personal, one far more relentless. The narrative grows taut with anticipation. The man's colleagues begin to accept him, though uneasily, folding him into their world of danger and dark humor. Yet he remains apart, his eyes always searching, his silence always betraying the truth, that he is waiting for the right moment, the right sign, the right chance to confront the men who broke his world. Key events mount one after another. Another attempted robbery, another show of his lethality. Each time, the violence feels less like reaction and more like ritual, as though he is testing himself, sharpening his wrath in preparation. We see his visits to shadowy figures in the city, men who provide information, connections, whispers of the criminal underworld. Each conversation brings him closer, narrowing the field of suspects, pointing him toward the truth. His mission is not random. It is meticulous as the thieves who killed his son. And then the threads begin to knot. We see the robbery again, the one where his son died, this time through the eyes of the thieves. Their precision, their cruelty, their greed, it all unfolds with chilling detachment. They did not see his son as human, only as collateral, a bystander whose life was extinguished for convenience. Watching this, we understand fully why the man's wrath is so consuming. This is not vengeance for an abstract wrong. This is grief sharpened into obsession, a father's love twisted into fury. His silence, his coldness, his brutality, they're all born of this wound. By this point, we are no longer watching a story of armored trucks and robberies. We are watching a descent, a myth retold in modern form. The man is no longer simply a character. He is an archetype, a figure of tragedy and wrath, pursuing his quarry with inevitability. Each robbery, each ambush, each death brings him closer to the men he seeks. Each fragment of the past revealed pulls us deeper into the inevitability of his mission. What keeps us riveted is not just the action, but the slow, deliberate unveiling of truth. The man we thought we met in the beginning is not who he is at all. The robberies we thought were random are not random at all. The job we thought was ordinary employment is not employment at all. Everything is inverted, reframed, revealed as part of a deeper design. And as the narrative tightens, the tension builds. We know now who he is. We know what drives him. We know what he seeks. But the path to that end is still cloaked in shadows, filled with dangers that feel inevitable. We sense that his journey is not toward triumph, but toward a reckoning that will scar everyone in its path. The armored trucks will roll again, the thieves will strike again, and when they do, wrath will meet precision, grief will meet cruelty, vengeance will meet inevitability. This is the world we inhabit as the story carries us forward, a world of smoke and steel, silence and fire, grief and wrath. And at its center, a man whose every breath is charged with purpose, whose every step brings him closer to the collision that will define his fate. The story shifts into a place where silence feels heavier than noise, where every look and every pause carries the weight of inevitability. By now, the man who once seemed to be a mystery has revealed just enough of himself for us to know that his journey is far darker than it first appeared. What began as the tale of a quiet recruit in a cash truck company has unraveled into something much more mythic, a meditation on grief, vengeance, and the unraveling of lives when they collide with wrath. And it is here, in the deepening spiral of the narrative, that everything starts pressing inward toward collision. The robberies escalate, growing sharper, more precise, and more dangerous. The thieves, with their soldiers' discipline and ruthless conviction, begin to take on clearer outlines. We see their lives, their plans, their bonds of loyalty that are less about honor and more about greed. Each man has his reasons, some born of bitterness, others of desperation. But together they form a machine of violence, orchestrated by a leader who sees armored trucks not as symbols of danger, but as moving vaults of opportunity. Their precision is chilling, their camaraderie unsettling. They laugh together, plan together, and kill together with the ease of men who have long stopped measuring morality against consequence. And into their world stalks the shadow of the man who hunts them. He moves with the patience of someone who knows that vengeance cannot be rushed. He studies their methods, listens for their whispers, gathers fragments of truth until the picture is clear. His silence becomes a weapon. Where they trust in their voices, he trusts in his quiet. Where they revel in their greed, he carries only grief sharpened into focus. The tension tightens because we know the paths will converge, and when they do, there will be no negotiation, no compromise, only reckoning. One of the revelations that deepens the narrative comes when we are shown, with cruel clarity, the truth of his son's death. The robbery that destroyed him was not an accident, not random chaos, but the calculated brutality of these same men. From their perspective, his son was nothing more than an inconvenience, a bystander whose life was erased for efficiency. This revelation reframes everything we have seen. His job at the cash truck company was never about employment. It was infiltration, penetration into the very system that his enemies sought to exploit. Every moment he spent with his colleagues, every robbery he thwarted, was not about protection, but about positioning himself closer to the men he needed to destroy. And yet, the story does not simply hand him victory. Wrath, after all, is not a clean path. The thieves are clever, ruthless, and united by their own code. Their loyalty to one another is distorted but real, forged in blood and danger. As the man draws closer, the danger grows sharper, until every armored truck ride becomes a crucible where betrayal and death might ignite at any moment. The film fractures again in its structure, showing us events through multiple perspectives. A robbery is shown once as triumph, then again as tragedy, the angles shifting until truth itself feels unstable. Time folds back, revisiting moments we thought we understood, only to reveal new shadows lurking within them. This structure mirrors grief itself, the way memory replays, the way loss refuses to remain fixed in time, the way the past intrudes upon the present until everything circles back to the wound. As the tension crescendos, the inevitable heist takes shape. The thieves set their sights on the ultimate score, the robbery that will eclipse all others. It is a job of staggering ambition, meticulously planned, executed with military precision. For them, It is the culmination of years of risk, the moment where they seize fortune and disappear. But for him, it is the opportunity he has been waiting for, the moment when their paths will cross in fire, when the faces that haunt him will finally stand before his wrath. The heist unfolds with terrifying precision. Armored trucks are hijacked, guards subdued, chaos spreading across the city like wildfire. The thieves move like soldiers, every motion rehearsed, every step calculated. But even in their perfection, cracks begin to show. Greed strains their unity, fear gnaws at their confidence. And into this chaos steps the man who has waited, silent and scarred, his grief burning brighter than their ambition. What follows is not merely action, but confrontation. Violence erupts with unflinching brutality, corridors filled with gunfire, streets littered with debris. Yet beneath the spectacle lies something more profound, the clash of philosophies. On one side, greed disguised as camaraderie, conviction hardened into cruelty. On the other, grief sharpened into obsession, loyalty scarred into vengeance. The man does not fight for wealth, nor even for justice in the conventional sense. He fights for balance, for the restoration of a world that was shattered when his son's life was taken. Every bullet he fires, every life he ends, is not the thrill of action, but the ritual of reckoning. The thieves fall one by one, their discipline unable to withstand the inevitability of wrath. Their leader fights with the desperation of someone who believes himself untouchable, but even he cannot stand against a man who has already lost everything. The climax, when it arrives, is less a battle than an execution of fate. The man confronts the one who pulled the trigger on his son, the face that has haunted every silence, every nightmare. The confrontation is raw, unflinching, stripped of melodrama. Words are few, but the weight of grief fills the air. And when vengeance is finally enacted, it does not feel like triumph. It feels like inevitability. In that moment, the story reminds us that wrath cannot restore what was lost. His son does not return, his life is not healed. The thieves are dead, but their absence does not erase his grief. What he achieves is not satisfaction, but closure of a darker kind, the closing of a wound that will never truly heal. It is not a victory march, but a funeral rite, an ending that leaves silence heavier than the explosions that came before. The resolution that follows is quiet, subdued. The chaos has passed, the city breathes again, but the man remains scarred. His journey is over, but not complete, for grief is not a story that ends with vengeance. It lingers, reshapes, defines. We are left with an image not of triumph, but of survival, of a man who has endured the fire but remains marked by it. His wrath has burned through his enemies, but in doing so it has consumed a part of him as well. And this, perhaps, is the deepest truth the story offers. Wrath may bring justice, it may bring balance, but it can never bring peace. The armored trucks roll again, the routines of the city resume, but beneath the surface lies the scar of what has passed. For him, the world will always be divided into before and after, into the life where his son lived and the life where he does not. His journey reminds us that vengeance is not about restoration, but about endurance, not about triumph, but about persistence through loss. By the time the credits fade, we are left with an unease that lingers. We have witnessed not simply an action film, but a tragedy in modern form, a fable dressed in steel and smoke. It is a story about grief masquerading as vengeance, about wrath masquerading as justice, about the fragility of permanence and the inevitability of loss. Its resolution is not comforting but haunting, a reminder that survival itself, scarred and imperfect, is sometimes the only victory possible. And so the story closes as it began, not with fanfare, but with silence heavy with meaning. The man walks away from the fire he created, scarred but unbroken, carrying with him not triumph, but the echo of love that was lost, the grief that shaped him, and the wrath that consumed him. In that silence, we recognize ourselves, our own fractures, our own struggles to endure when permanence collapses. And in that recognition, we understand why this story lingers, why its wrath feels less like fantasy and more like truth. Every story is only as powerful as the souls who walk through it. And in this particular tale, the characters are not simply figures moving across a stage of armored trucks and city streets. They are the embodiment of themes that stretch across time, echoing from ancient tragedies to modern fables. Each of them carries a weight heavier than their words, their actions becoming symbols of grief, greed, loyalty, and betrayal. To trace their arcs is to peel back the mask of the narrative itself, revealing the deeper meditations hidden beneath its violence. At the center stands a figure we first meet as a quiet, inscrutable recruit. His demeanor is one of restraint, his silence is more loaded than the words of others. What defines him is not charisma or charm, but gravity, a heaviness that pulls all others into orbit. At first, his colleagues cannot decipher him. They see only a man of minimal expression, who listens more than he speaks, whose eyes seem to study everything yet reveal nothing. But as the story unfolds, the mask cracks, and we see the wound that shapes him, the loss of his son, taken in an act of violence that transformed his existence. He is not simply a man with skills honed by some mysterious past. He is grief personified, vengeance embodied. His wrath is not spontaneous, but calculated, sharpened by silence and patience. What makes him compelling is not invincibility, though he often appears unstoppable, but his brokenness. His humanity lies not in perfection, but in the fracture that defines him, the wound that never heals. Like tragic heroes of old, he is propelled forward not by choice, but by fate, his entire being narrowed into one purpose. This central figure becomes the embodiment of dualities. On one hand, he is ruthless, precise, efficient in his violence. He dispatches enemies with a coldness that terrifies even his allies. On the other, he is a father broken by loss, a man whose silence conceals an ocean of grief. His complexity lies in the tension between these aspects, the human and the archetype, the grieving father and the mythic avenger. Literature often gives us such figures. Achilles raging at the death of Patroclus, Hamlet driven by his father's murder, Aeneas torn between duty and loss. Our protagonist belongs to that lineage. His story is not only of bullets and blood, but of grief transformed into inevitability. His story is not only of bullets and blood, but of grief transformed into inevitability. He is not alive in the ordinary sense. He is surviving on the fumes of wrath. Surrounding him are colleagues who, at first, perceive him through the lens of suspicion. They are hardened men, used to danger, but numbed by routine. Their lives revolve around the armored trucks they guard, their camaraderie forged in the shadow of risk. When the new recruit joins, their reaction is telling. They test him, mock him, study him with unease. They know instinctively that he is not one of them. His silence unnerves them. His skills terrify them. These colleagues serve as mirrors for the audience. Through their eyes, we see the strangeness of the protagonist. Their jokes, their attempts at camaraderie, their sudden awe after his first display of violence, all remind us that he is not ordinary. And yet, their humanity also highlights his isolation. Where they cope with danger through banter, he carries silence. Where they seek community, he seeks vengeance. They remind us of what he has lost, the capacity to be ordinary, to be part of the living chorus of humanity. Among these colleagues, one or two stand out as more deeply drawn. There's often the skeptic, the one who does not trust him, who voices suspicions others are too cautious to say aloud. This skeptic is not wrong, for the man they work beside is indeed not who he claims to be. Yet the skeptic's mistrust serves a deeper narrative function. It reminds us that secrets cannot remain buried, that truth gnaws its way to the surface. Then there is the colleague who begins to admire him, who sees in his precision a kind of twisted nobility. These contrasts within the crew highlight the complexity of human perception. Some are drawn to power, others repelled by it. Together, They create a microcosm of society's response to figures like the protagonist: fear, awe, admiration, suspicion. The thieves themselves form another chorus, but one of corruption. Unlike the protagonist, whose wrath is born of loss, theirs is driven by greed. And yet, they are not painted as faceless villains. Each carries shades of humanity, distorted but recognizable. They are former soldiers, men shaped by discipline and violence, now turn to crime not from chaos but from calculation. Their leader embodies this most clearly. He is not reckless but methodical, not loud but precise. His cruelty is chilling because it is not impulsive. It is logical, efficient, stripped of empathy. In him, we see the dark mirror of the protagonist. Both men are shaped by discipline. Both move with ruthless precision. Both command loyalty from those around them. The difference lies in motivation, one driven by grief, the other by greed. Their eventual confrontation is thus not merely physical but philosophical. It is the clash of wrath against ambition, grief against greed, inevitability against arrogance. Among the thieves, too, we find echoes of archetypes. There is the loyal soldier, bound to his comrades more than to the morality of their mission. There is the cynic, who pursues the score with resignation, aware of the risk but numb to its cost. There is the reckless one, whose impulsiveness cracks the group's precision, hinting at the fragility beneath their discipline. Together, they form a distorted reflection of the armored truck crew. Both groups are bands of men bound by danger, but where one seeks survival, the other seeks exploitation. This parallel deepens the allegory, reminding us that morality is not in circumstance but in choice. The most haunting figure among the thieves is the one who pulled the trigger that ended the protagonist's son's life. He is not given the dignity of myth. His act is portrayed with casual cruelty, the indifference of a man who sees human life as expendable. And yet, his ordinariness is precisely what makes him terrifying. He is not a monster in appearance or demeanor. He is simply a man who chose greed over humanity. In literature, the most chilling villains are often those who are not extraordinary but painfully ordinary. Men whose cruelty comes not from grandeur but from banality. This thief embodies that truth. When the protagonist finally confronts him, the moment is not theatrical but inevitable. It is not hero against villain, but grief against indifference, wrath against apathy. Secondary figures orbit around this central conflict, each adding texture to the story. There are the executives of the cash truck company, bureaucrats who see violence as numbers, losses as inconveniences. Their detachment contrasts sharply with the protagonist's personal mission. They remind us of the cold machinery of systems, indifferent to the human cost. There are also figures from the protagonist's past, shadowy connections who provide him with information, who speak to him in the language of the underworld. These figures remind us that he is not new to violence, that his skill and ruthlessness are born from a life already steeped in blood. They ground him in a world beyond the armored trucks, a world of crime and shadows that continues to shape him. What makes the character dynamics so compelling is the way they embody themes larger than themselves. The protagonist represents grief sharpened into vengeance. His colleagues represent ordinary humanity, coping with danger through humor and routine. The thieves represent greed masquerading as camaraderie, loyalty corrupted into exploitation. The company executives represent the indifference of systems. Each group, each character, becomes a symbol in a larger allegory about fragility, loss, and survival. The emotional resonance of the characters lies not only in their actions, but in their silences. The protagonist rarely speaks, but his grief is louder than words. His colleagues joke constantly, but their laughter conceals fear. The thieves speak with bravado, but beneath their confidence lies desperation. Silence and speech, laughter and bravado, all become masks hiding deeper truths. The narrative constantly reminds us to look beneath the surface, to see what words cannot reveal. What lingers after watching them is not only the violence they enact, but the humanity they reveal in fragments. The protagonist, despite his ruthlessness, is defined by love, the love of a father so fierce that its loss consumes him. His colleagues, despite their flaws, embody the resilience of ordinary people facing danger. The thieves, despite their cruelty, remind us of the peril of conviction without compassion, of loyalty corrupted by greed. Each character becomes a lesson, a mirror, a symbol. When a story closes, we remember them not as names on a page or faces on a screen, but as echoes of truths we recognize in ourselves. We know the weight of grief, the temptation of greed, the need for camaraderie, the danger of betrayal. We know the silence of wounds carried too heavily to be spoken. These characters endure because they are not fantasy. They are reflections of us, distorted into myth, sharpened into allegory. And that is why they linger, long after the fire and smoke fade. Every film carries with it two narratives. The one written into the script, carved into performances, and projected on screen, and another quieter, stranger one that lived behind the cameras, whispered in anecdotes, and carried in the memories of those who built it. Wrath of Man is no exception. Beneath its surface of steel, armored trucks, and Jason Statham's silent, simmering wrath lies a web of unusual occurrences, odd production details, and behind-the-scenes curiosities that shape the movie into what we now know. To tell the story of these strange facts is almost like tracing the shadows of the film, the parts we never see but that ripple beneath every frame. The first and most fascinating truth is that the movie is not, in fact, born entirely from Hollywood imagination. It is a remake, a retelling of a French film called Le Convoi, 2004, directed by Nicolas Boukrieff. This earlier film was raw, somber, steeped in a very different cultural tone. French melancholy, a kind of bleakness woven into its narrative fabric. Guy Ritchie, long associated with sharp British crime, capers brimming with swagger and ironic humor, chose to adapt this work into something new. That decision was strange in itself. A director famed for quippy dialogue and stylized mischief, turning toward minimalism and tragedy. And yet, he reshaped it into a meditation on grief and vengeance, borrowing the skeletal structure but grafting onto it his own rhythms. The strangeness lies in the contrast, that a French crime thriller born of European fatalism found itself reincarnated through British direction and Hollywood muscle, transformed into something at once familiar and alien. Equally unusual is the way Jason Statham was brought into this project. His collaboration with Guy Ritchie is storied, stretching back decades to Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch. Those early films introduced him not as an action juggernaut, but as a wiry presence with charm and a knack for sly delivery. To reunite after years apart for Wrath of Man felt like both a return and a reinvention. Statham was no longer the youthful hustler of Ritchie's early cinema. He was now an established action icon, the face of franchises like The Transporter and Fast and Furious. But here, Ritchie stripped him of his usual ironic edge. He barely speaks, his dialogue clipped, his performance rooted in silence and menace. In interviews, Statham admitted that the hardest part of the role was not the stunts, which he had long mastered, but the restraint. "It's easy to throw punches," he quipped once. "It's harder to say nothing and still tell the story." That inversion of his trademark style became one of the strangest, most fascinating aspects of the film. An actor defined by one persona deliberately turning against it, sculpting instead a figure of grief and wrath. The film's production itself carried oddities, shaped by circumstances far larger than cinema. Much of it was filmed in Los Angeles and London, but production collided with the chaos of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sets were shut down, schedules rearranged, protocols enforced that transformed filmmaking into a labyrinth of restrictions. Cast and crew worked in bubbles, tested constantly, masked when cameras weren't rolling. This unusual circumstance created a surreal atmosphere. Actors performing scenes of violence and intimacy while surrounded by invisible walls of protocol. In some ways, the sense of paranoia seeped into the film itself. The story's claustrophobia, its distrust of routine and structure, felt mirrored by the real-world conditions in which it was filmed. When critics later noted the movie's atmosphere of unease, they were responding not only to storytelling, but to the ghost of its production reality. Another odd detail lies in the film's fractured structure. Ritchie insisted that the story be told in chapters, circling events rather than moving linearly. This was not simply an artistic choice, but also a puzzle in the editing room. The narrative was filmed more or less in straightforward order, but when assembled, it became something else entirely, a spiral rather than a march. Editors later revealed that whole sequences were restructured, moved across the timeline like chess pieces, until the story carried the rhythm of memory rather than chronology. This reshuffling was so extensive that actors admitted being surprised at the premiere, watching scenes unfold in an order entirely different from how they had performed them. "I didn't know when I was in the past or present anymore," one crew member confessed. That strangeness, born in the editing suite, became one of the film's defining features. Trivia often reveals unexpected intersections, and Wrath of Man carries several. Scott Eastwood, who plays a key antagonist, is the son of Clint Eastwood, and the resonance is uncanny. Clint himself was an icon of vengeance and stoic masculinity in films like Dirty Harry and Unforgiven. To see his son cast as a violent criminal who becomes the focus of Statham's wrath is to witness a generational inversion. The child of a cinematic legend embodying the corruption that another figure of wrath must destroy. In interviews, Scott Eastwood acknowledged this eerie connection, admitting that he leaned into his father's shadow as both inspiration and counterpoint. "I grew up watching him play the guy who brought justice," he said. "Here, I'm the one who has it coming." Even the film's props carried strangeness. The armored trucks at the center of the narrative were custom-built for filming, designed to be both authentic and cinematic. They had to withstand explosions, crashes, and endless retakes, yet still move convincingly like real cash vehicles. Crew members joked that the trucks became characters in their own right, beasts of steel that groaned and creaked under the weight of storytelling. Some of them were damaged so extensively during action sequences that they had to be rebuilt overnight by mechanics working in shifts, patching bullet holes, and welding doors before dawn. One truck was so battered that it was retired mid-shoot, left abandoned like a carcass, quietly rusting while its twin took over. The film's use of silence was another unusual choice. Guy Ritchie, known for dialogue-heavy scripts, deliberately pulled back. Long stretches of the film pass with little or no speech, relying instead on body language, glances, the rhythm of footsteps in empty corridors. Sound designers leaned into this by amplifying subtle noises, the click of a gun, the shuffle of money bags, the breath of a man waiting in ambush. In one sequence, Statham walks through a warehouse with no music, no dialogue, only the sound of his boots striking concrete. That minimalism was deliberate, and it unnerved even the crew on set. It felt eerie, one sound engineer admitted. You could hear everything, the cameras, the breaths, the silence between us. It wasn't like any other action scene. Another strange fact lies in the film's international journey. Though set in Los Angeles, parts were filmed in London for logistical reasons, requiring elaborate sets that replicated American streets. Extras were cast to mimic the energy of California life, though they were in fact Londoners under the direction of dialect coaches. The illusion was so convincing that even some critics assumed the entire movie had been shot in America. This blending of spaces reflects the strangeness of cinema itself. Places transformed into other places, realities bent into fictions. The actors themselves carried personal oddities into their roles. Holt McCallany, who plays one of Statham's colleagues, had recently gained recognition for Mindhunter, a series about psychological study of criminals. Here, he inhabited a grittier, more physical role, yet he brought with him the same intensity of observation. On set, he was known for slipping into character even between takes, adopting the posture and slang of armored truck guards, studying routines until he seemed to belong in that world. Crew members joked that he became so convincing they considered actually hiring him to guard the trucks between shoots. Then there is the curious story of the film's title. Early in development, it was simply called Cash Truck, echoing the original French title. Only later was it retitled Wrath of Man, a decision that shifted perception entirely. Where Cash Truck suggested a heist film in straightforward terms, Wrath of Man carried mythic weight, evoking biblical fury, Shakespearean tragedy, ancient vengeance. Ritchie admitted that the new title came late in the process, but once chosen, it reframed everything. Suddenly, the film was not about trucks, but about wrath itself. Not about robbery, but about the consuming force of grief turned violent. This renaming is a strange fact in itself, a reminder of how words can reshape the essence of a story. The audience, too, contributed to the strangeness of the film's legacy. Released in 2021, amid the uncertainty of a pandemic, it drew viewers into theaters at a time when theaters themselves were fragile. Its box office performance was shaped as much by circumstance as by merit. Some audiences found it cathartic, a brutal story that mirrored their own feelings of frustration and unease. Others found it too bleak, too cold, too stripped of the humor they associated with Ritchie. The divided response was unusual but fitting. The film itself was built on paradoxes: action yet silence, vengeance yet grief, spectacle yet restraint. It is little wonder that its reception echoed those contradictions. Even in small details, strangeness lingered. One prop manager revealed that stacks of cash used in the film were in fact meticulously crafted fakes, so convincing that crew members joked about stealing them. Each bundle was made of paper inserts with only the top and bottom bills authentic, a trick that required hours of labor to prepare. After filming, the bundles were stored under lock and key, not because they were worth anything, but because they looked too real. Jason Statham himself added to the lore with his approach to stunts. He is known for doing much of his own action, but here he pushed himself even further. In one scene, he performed a sequence of combat inside a cramped truck without doubles, insisting that the authenticity of his movement mattered more than convenience. Afterward, he emerged bruised and scraped but satisfied. "If it looks too clean," he said, "then it isn't real." This insistence on imperfection gave the film its unique texture, violence that felt unvarnished, brutal rather than choreographed. In the end, the strangest facts about Wrath of Man reveal it to be a film born of contradictions and accidents, of choices that ran against expectation. A French thriller reborn as Hollywood meditation. A director of banter embracing silence. An action star defined by charisma reduced to wordless grief. Trucks built to be destroyed, soundscapes built from silence, timelines fractured into spirals. A pandemic wrapping its shadow around production, shaping atmosphere as surely as any script. All of these layers whisper beneath the surface of the film we see, making it richer, stranger, more haunted. And perhaps that is the truest strangeness of all, that what appears on screen is only half the story. Beneath the bullets and armored steel lie tales of editing rooms reshuffling time, of actors carrying personal shadows, of crews welding trucks at dawn, of titles shifting from bland to mythic, of silence amplified until it screamed. When we watch the film now, knowing these facts, we realize that its atmosphere of unease, its weight of inevitability, was not only crafted by intention, but also by circumstance. It is the rare case where the story behind the story is as layered, as fractured, and as strange as the story itself. Stories like this one live and breathe through their events, but the events themselves are never only what they seem on the surface. A robbery is never simply about stolen money. A gunfight is never just the exchange of bullets. A father's silence is never just absence of words. In Wrath of Man, every moment is layered with meaning, carrying the resonance of grief, the weight of vengeance, and the contradictions of justice. To walk through these events critically is to see not only what happens, but what each happening implies. what it whispers about humanity, about violence, about fragility, about the way stories function as mirrors for our own fears and desires. The very first robbery sequence that opens the film sets the tone for everything that follows. At face value, it is an action set piece, a cash truck ambushed, its crew overwhelmed, chaos erupting in minutes. Yet from a critical lens, this moment is more than spectacle. It introduces us to the fragility of routine, the collapse of order in the face of sudden violence. The armored truck, supposedly invincible, becomes a coffin. The guards, supposedly secure, become victims. This inversion is crucial. It establishes the film's central preoccupation, the illusion of permanence, undone in an instant. Thematically, it resonates as an allegory of fragility itself. Our lives, our routines, our perceived safeties can shatter without warning. It is also the moment that plants the seed of grief, the tragedy that reshapes the protagonist's entire life. Critics who noted the film's bleakness often returned to this opening sequence, recognizing that it was not simply thrilling but destabilizing, meant to unsettle the audience rather than entertain them. The introduction of the protagonist into the cash truck company seems, on the surface, like a typical setup. A new recruit learning the ropes, his colleagues testing him, the audience waiting for his moment to prove himself. But beneath this familiar trope lies a more interesting critical dimension. His silence, his restraint, his inscrutability immediately mark him as an outsider. He is not here to belong, nor to adapt. He is here to infiltrate, to position himself. The critical perspective here is that we are watching not an initiation, but a performance. He wears the mask of a recruit, but his eyes betray the truth. He is already a predator among them. The co-workers who test him, joke with him, and mock him are unwittingly playing their roles in a play whose outcome has already been decided. This event, therefore, speaks to the theme of appearances versus realities, how what we see is never what truly is. It is also a commentary on masculinity. The locker room bravado of his colleagues contrasted with his cold, silent competence. He destabilizes their rituals of toughness by embodying a more terrifying version of it, one stripped of humor, one fueled by grief. The event becomes a turning point not only for the narrative, but for its symbolic undercurrents. His colleagues expect him to falter, to panic, to show himself as untested. Instead, he moves with a lethal efficiency that terrifies them. From a critical standpoint, this is the moment where the mask slips. The audience now knows what his co-workers only suspect, that he is not who he claims to be. This revelation destabilizes the power dynamics within the company. He is no longer the outsider being tested. He is now the figure everyone else must measure themselves against. But beyond plot mechanics, this moment resonates thematically as the eruption of grief into violence. His efficiency is not the product of simple training. It is the manifestation of his wound, his single-minded purpose sharpened into action. The event becomes allegory, grief expressed as precision, pain expressed as brutality. As the story folds back on itself to reveal the event of his son's death, the critical significance deepens. What we once saw as an ordinary robbery becomes, in retrospect, the crucible of tragedy. The narrative structure here is essential. By delaying the revelation, the film forces us to experience disorientation similar to grief itself. Just as mourners often replay events in their minds, try to piece together how things could have gone differently, the film circles back, replaying the robbery through different lenses. From a critical viewpoint, this repetition mirrors the psychology of trauma. The event is not linear, not finished. It loops, haunts, refuses to stay in the past. This is why the fractured timeline matters. It is not a gimmick, but an expression of the way memory and grief distort perception. The son's death itself is presented without melodrama, which is precisely what makes it so devastating. There is no swelling music, no heroic last words. It is quick, brutal, almost incidental. Critically, this reflects the banality of violence. Lives end not with grandeur, but with indifference, not with climactic meaning, but with cold efficiency. This indifference is what propels the father's wrath. His son was not killed for passion or even ideology, but for convenience. The lack of meaning in the event is what demands meaning to be created afterward, and that meaning becomes vengeance. Here, the event transforms into allegory. When life is ended without significance, survivors impose significance through wrath. The gradual revelation of the thieves as former soldiers, disciplined and ruthless, reframes the story again. They are not caricatures, but professionals, their precision mirroring the protagonist's own. Critically, this creates a mirror dynamic. The Avenger and the villains are cut from the same cloth, both shaped by violence, both moving with cold calculation, both embodying loyalty twisted into something darker. This symmetry elevates the story from simple revenge into myth. It becomes the clash of doubles, the confrontation of reflections, each embodying opposite sides of the same discipline. Critics who praise the film often pointed to this choice as what set it apart from generic thrillers. The antagonists are not faceless, but frighteningly competent, forcing the protagonist's wrath to meet an equal. One of the most significant events is the revelation of the robber who pulled the trigger on the son. Narratively, it is the target of the Avenger's journey, the name at the center of his obsession. Critically, however, the significance lies not in the villain's uniqueness, but in his ordinariness. He is not a grand nemesis, not a Hannibal Lecter figure of genius, but a petty man whose greed outweighed his empathy. This banality of evil is chilling. It reinforces the idea that tragedy often arises not from extraordinary villains, but from ordinary cruelty. His ordinariness makes the Avenger's wrath feel both justified and tragic. When he finally faces this man, it is not hero versus villain in grandiose proportions, but grief confronting apathy. The climactic heist, where the thieves attempt their ultimate robbery and the Avenger intercepts, is the culmination of all the film's themes. From a critical perspective, this event is not merely the resolution of plot threads, but the embodiment of allegorical conflict. On one side, greed disguised as camaraderie, precision employed for personal gain. On the other, grief disguised as silence, precision employed for vengeance. The armored trucks become symbolic coffins, vessels of wealth transformed into vessels of death. The city streets become a stage where these two philosophies clash. The brutality of the sequence, its lack of glamour, its emphasis on messiness and exhaustion, reinforces the film's insistence that violence is never clean. Critics who found the film too bleak often pointed to this climax, describing it as relentless, suffocating, unwilling to grant catharsis. And yet, for others, that was precisely its strength. A refusal to romanticize wrath, an insistence on showing vengeance as scarred and hollow. When the Avenger finally enacts his vengeance upon the man who killed his son, the moment is stripped of theatrics. There is no drawn-out speech, no flourish of victory. There is only inevitability. From a critical lens, this refusal of spectacle is crucial. It denies the audience the comfort of triumph. Instead, it forces us to confront the truth. Vengeance does not heal, wrath does not restore, grief does not vanish. The man achieves what he set out to do, but he remains scarred, broken, incomplete. Thematically, this resonates with the traditions of tragedy. Like Orestes avenging Agamemnon, like Hamlet avenging his father, he fulfills the demand of wrath, but remains haunted by it. His story is not one of victory, but of survival. The resolution, quiet and subdued, is one of the most telling events. The world moves on, the trucks roll again, routines resume. But the man remains fractured. From a critical perspective, this ending resists the conventions of action cinema. It denies catharsis, denies glory, denies the illusion of closure. Instead, it insists on unease, on silence. The film ends as it began, with fragility exposed, with permanence revealed as illusion. This choice divided audiences. Some admired its bleak honesty, others found it unsatisfying. But either way, it left an impression, forcing conversation about what vengeance means in a world where grief cannot be erased. The emotional resonance of these events lies in their refusal to conform to expectation. The opening robbery unsettles rather than thrills. The first display of the protagonist's violence terrifies rather than inspires. The revelation of his grief reframes rather than comforts. The climax exhausts rather than exhilarates. The ending haunts rather than satisfies. Each significant event contributes to this overarching philosophy, that wrath is not glory, but burden, that violence is not clean, but scarring, that grief is not healed, but endured. From a critical standpoint, the film's impact lies precisely in this inversion of genre expectations. Action films often promise catharsis through vengeance, triumph through violence, restoration through justice. Wrath of Man withholds that promise. It offers instead tragedy disguised as thriller, allegory disguised as heist film. This is why its reception was divided. Critics who expected entertainment recoiled from its bleakness. Those who approached it as allegory praised its weight. Audiences who craved triumph were left uneasy. But in that unease lies its resonance. This is why its reception was divided. Critics who expected entertainment recoiled from its bleakness. Those who approached it as allegory praised its weight. Audiences who craved triumph were left uneasy. But in that unease lies its resonance. Ultimately, the film's significant events, viewed critically, reveal a meditation on grief, wrath, and the futility of vengeance. The robberies are not robberies, but allegories of fragility. The violence is not spectacle, but expression of pain. The characters are not merely figures, but symbols of humanity's fractures. The climax is not resolution, but ritual. The resolution, not closure, but silence. And this, perhaps, is why the film lingers. It is not because of its armored trucks or its explosions, not because of its choreography of violence, but because it dares to ask questions we cannot easily answer. What does grief demand of us? What does vengeance cost us? What remains when wrath has burned everything else away? These questions haunt the events of the story, and they continue to haunt us long after the screen fades to black. The making of a film is always a story within a story, a parallel narrative that unspools not in polished sequences on screen, but in long days on set, in strange accidents, in choices made at midnight in the editing suite, in the camaraderie and exhaustion of cast and crew. Wrath of Man, with its taut silence, its fractured timeline, its grim tale of grief and vengeance, may look effortless in its final form, as though it emerged already sharpened like a blade. But behind its clean lines lies another narrative, filled with improvisation, strange coincidences, practical struggles, and moments of quiet absurdity. To trace these production insights is to reveal how the film's atmosphere was sculpted, not only through intention, but through accidents and serendipity, and how the people who built it carried themselves through the fire of creation. One of the earliest decisions that shaped the film was its origin, adapting Nicolas Boucreff's French movie Le Convoyeur. Guy Ritchie has long been associated with his uniquely British brand of cinema. Fast-paced editing, quippy dialogue, ironic detachment, and characters who swagger through criminal underworlds. Choosing to remake a French thriller, especially one defined by bleakness and silence, seemed strange to many observers. Yet Ritchie saw in it an opportunity. He wanted to strip himself of old habits, to create a film where words were sparse, where mood replaced banter, where silence carried more weight than monologues. In production meetings, he reportedly repeated a phrase: no frills, no fluff, just wrath. That mantra shaped every aspect of the shoot. Writers and producers described the adaptation process as a kind of distillation, keeping the skeletal outline, but reworking the flesh into something colder, harder, leaner. Casting was the second major stroke of fate. Jason Statham, Ritchie's old collaborator from Lock, Stock, and Snatch, returned after decades apart. The reunion carried both nostalgia and challenge. Statham had grown into one of Hollywood's most bankable action stars, known for his charisma, his stunts, his sardonic humor. Ritchie asked him to do the opposite: strip away humor, reduce dialogue, act through silence. On set, Statham admitted it felt alien. "Guy kept telling me, do less," he recalled later. "And I'd say, I'm already doing nothing." But that was the point. He wanted every twitch, every look to be loaded. Crew members observed how Statham would rehearse, not his lines. He barely had any, but his stillness. He practiced holding his body in tension, speaking with his eyes. The production itself became an exercise in subtraction, in creating intensity through restraint. Filming locations added another layer of strangeness. Although the story is set in Los Angeles, much of it was shot in London, with sets meticulously designed to replicate American streets and warehouses. Production designers pored over photographs, sourcing authentic American vehicles, signage, and even manhole covers. Extras were trained to adopt the body language and cadence of Angelenos, though they were Londoners at heart. The illusion was so convincing that when the cast shifted between LA and London shoots, even they sometimes forgot which city they were in. A crew member later laughed about driving through an industrial estate in London that had been transformed into a faux Los Angeles street. "It was uncanny," he said, "like waking up in a dream where you're somewhere familiar but wrong." The armored trucks themselves were characters in their own right. Custom-built for the production, they had to balance realism with practicality. Real cash trucks are unwieldy, heavy, and cramped, not ideal for filming. The production team modified several to allow for camera rigs, hidden compartments for crew, and reinforced frames for stunts. One truck became so battered from repeated explosions and collisions that it was retired halfway through shooting. The crew nicknamed it Old Faithful, a dented, scorched beast that limped through scenes until finally abandoned behind the studio. Mechanics worked overnight to patch bullet holes, weld doors, and keep the trucks functional. By the end, one designer said they felt alive. Each truck had its own scars, its own personality. Then there was the strange reality of filming during the COVID-19 pandemic. Production was shut down in March 2020 after just 2 weeks of shooting. When it resumed months later, it was under strict protocols: masks, constant testing, crews divided into bubbles, actors rehearsing with distance before stepping into proximity for scenes. The tension of that period seeped into the atmosphere of the film. The sense of paranoia, of isolation, of fragility. Many involved believed it influenced the mood captured on camera. "We were already living in fear, already walking into work, wondering if today was the day everything stopped again," one assistant director said. That unease is in the movie. You can feel it. Guy Ritchie himself became known for his unorthodox directing style throughout production. While many directors rely on pre-visualization, extensive storyboarding, and rigid schedules, Ritchie worked more like a jazz musician, improvising, adjusting, pushing scenes to evolve in the moment. He would sometimes scrap dialogue on the spot, telling actors to play a scene with silence instead. On other occasions, he would reposition the camera mid-shoot, chasing a mood rather than a plan. This unsettled some crew members, especially those used to more conventional methods, but it also generated authenticity. "He was always chasing truth," Statham later said. If something felt staged, he tore it apart. He wanted grit, not gloss. Editing became one of the strangest and most crucial aspects of production. The film's fractured timeline, its circling back, its multiple perspectives, was largely shaped in post-production. The story was filmed in relatively straightforward sequence, but Ritchie and his editors dismantled it afterward, rearranging scenes until the narrative spiraled like memory. Editors recalled covering walls with index cards, shifting sequences like puzzle pieces. At one point, the film was nearly reassembled into chronological order, but Ritchie rejected it. "It's not about what happened," he insisted. "It's about how it's remembered." The final structure, fragmented, looping, was born of countless revisions, creating a rhythm that critics later described as haunting and disorienting. The sound design carried its own fascinating anecdotes. Because Ritchie had chosen to reduce dialogue, Sound became a primary tool of storytelling. Designers layered ambient noise with precision. The metallic clang of armored doors, the hum of engines, the suffocating silence before a gunshot. In one remarkable detail, they inserted the sound of slowed heartbeat beneath certain scenes, barely perceptible but felt by audiences as unease. This heartbeat was recorded by one of the engineers himself, who strapped a microphone to his chest during a workout. The result became a subtle motif of grief and tension, a human pulse buried beneath explosions. Stunts were another arena of both professionalism and strangeness. Statham, true to his reputation, performed many of his own, refusing doubles whenever possible. In one scene, he insisted on executing a fight sequence inside a cramped truck cabin, leaving himself bruised and scraped. Crew members begged him to step aside, but he refused. "If it's too clean, it's not real," he said. Several stunt performers echoed his philosophy, pushing themselves into dangerous territory. One stuntman miscalculated a wall jump and crashed awkwardly, but his panic looked so real that the footage was kept. "That's cinema," Ritchie declared afterward. "Accidents that look like truth." Even small props carried layers of effort and humor. The stacks of cash seen throughout the film were elaborate fakes, crafted from paper with only top and bottom bills authentic. They looked so real that they had to be stored under lock and key to prevent theft. Crew members joked about sneaking one home, but producers warned sternly that the fake bundles were valuable precisely because of their convincing appearance. In one playful moment, an extra tried to buy coffee with a prop bill at a local cafe, leading to a minor panic before everyone realized it was a fake. The casting of Scott Eastwood as Jan, one of the film's key antagonists, created its own meta-narrative. As the son of Clint Eastwood, an icon of stoic masculinity and cinematic vengeance, his role as the man who becomes the protagonist's target carried eerie resonance. Critics later noted how the generational inversion felt almost symbolic. Clint's cinematic legacy of justice inverted through his son playing greed and betrayal. On set, Scott reportedly leaned into this shadow, modeling some of his posture and cadence after his father, even as he portrayed the corruption that would make him the Avengers' prey. One fun fact that delighted fans after release was the film's shifting title. For much of its production, it was called Cash Truck, a simple echo of the French original. Only later did Ritchie rename it Wrath of Man, a decision that transformed perception. Statham joked in interviews that he preferred the new title because it sounded biblical, capturing the mythic tone the film was aiming for. Producers admitted that the marketing team initially resisted the change, fearing it sounded too grim. But Ritchie insisted, "It's not about trucks. It's about wrath." That insistence reshaped the project's identity. Filming the climactic heist sequence proved to be one of the most challenging aspects of production. Shot across multiple locations with dozens of extras, vehicles, and explosions, it required intricate choreography. Days stretched into nights as stunt coordinators mapped every beat, safety officers monitored every blast, and actors endured take after take in smoke-filled sets. At one point, a controlled explosion generated far more debris than anticipated, showering the set with dust and forcing a shutdown while crew checked for injuries. Fortunately, no one was harmed, but the footage of the real panic, actors flinching, scrambling instinctively, was so compelling that parts of it were woven into the final cut. This fusion of accident and art exemplified the production's philosophy: chaos embraced, truth captured. The film's release, too, became part of its production story. Originally slated for 2020, it was delayed by the pandemic, finally reaching audiences in 2021. This unusual timing shaped its reception. It became one of the first major films to draw people back into theaters after months of isolation. Viewers described the experience as cathartic, the film's brutality echoing their own pent-up frustrations. Others found it too bleak, too heavy, too reflective of the anxieties they were already living. In a strange way, the pandemic itself became part of the film's texture, inseparable from how it was received. When we look back now, what makes the production of Wrath of Man so fascinating is not just its big decisions, but its small, human details. The trucks welded back together overnight. The fake money locked up like treasure. The sound of a real heartbeat woven into silence. The actor bruising himself for authenticity. The crew joking about Old Faithful, the battered truck. The cafe incident with a fake bill. The editing room covered in index cards like a madman's puzzle. Each anecdote is a reminder that cinema is built not from perfection, but from imperfection, from improvisation, from accidents that become authenticity. The film itself, with its haunting silences and relentless bleakness, feels inevitable when we watch it. But behind that inevitability lies the strangeness of its making, the laughter and bruises, the masks and protocols, the choices that stripped away frills to reveal rawness. In that sense, the production story mirrors the narrative itself, a tale of persistence through fragility, of people carrying on despite obstacles, of scars worn as part of the texture. Just as the protagonist endured through grief, so too did the cast and crew endure through chaos, shaping something scarred but powerful. And perhaps that is the greatest insight. The film's grit was not only intentional, but lived. The wrath on screen was mirrored by the persistence behind the camera. The silence we feel in the story was mirrored by the silences on set, masked faces working in strange times. The realism of violence was mirrored by bruises and scrapes, accidents preserved as art. Wrath of Man is not only a film, but a testament to how stories are made. Through discipline, through improvisation, through strange accidents that become truth. And in that sense, its production is as haunting, as fascinating, and as strangely beautiful as the film itself. The world of Wrath of Man is not just a backdrop against which characters move, fight, and grieve. It is itself a character, one that breathes, suffocates, and resonates with meaning. Every warehouse, every street corner, every armored truck corridor is chosen and filmed in a way that adds weight to the story, drawing us deeper into its atmosphere of unease. To study the film through its settings and cinematic elements is to understand how Ritchie crafted not just a narrative of vengeance, but an environment of dread, a visual fable of grief. From the very opening, Los Angeles becomes more than a city. It is filmed not as the bright, sprawling metropolis of palm trees and sunshine that we so often see in Hollywood cinema, but as something colder, harsher, more industrial. We are guided not through the glamour of Beverly Hills, but through warehouses, empty freeways, steel yards, and hidden corners where danger lurks. This choice is deliberate. The film strips L.A. of romance and renders it as an unforgiving labyrinth, a perfect mirror for the protagonist's emotional state. This is not a world of opportunity, but of decay, not of dreams, but of debts and shadows. In the hands of Ritchie, the city itself becomes a scar, a map of broken promises. The Cash Truck Company, the armored fortress where much of the film unfolds, is itself an atmosphere of tension. Its setting is stripped of warmth. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, metal doors clang shut, walls are painted in sterile gray. The men who work here cope with the monotony through humor, but the building itself resists laughter. It feels cold, mechanical, indifferent. From a critical lens, this setting represents the dehumanization of modern labor. These men are risking their lives daily, yet they work in a place devoid of personality, where their worth is measured by the weight of money they transport. This sterile, suffocating environment underscores the bleakness of the protagonist's mission. He enters not into a workplace, but into a mausoleum, a fitting stage for grief disguised as labor. The armored trucks are perhaps the most important setting of all, functioning almost as moving coffins. Filmed in tight, claustrophobic frames, they emphasize confinement and vulnerability. Ritchie resists glamorizing them. Instead, he focuses on their interiors, cramped and airless, where men sit like prisoners waiting for ambush. The cinematography often presses in close within these spaces, the camera angles cutting off oxygen, forcing us to feel the same suffocating tension. This visual choice transforms every ride into a gamble, every shift into a crucible. Trucks that are supposed to symbolize security instead become harbingers of death. Thematically, they represent the illusion of safety, metal walls that can be breached, protocols that can fail, permanence that is fragile. When robberies occur, the locations expand into vast, open violence. Highways, city streets, loading docks. Yet even these spaces are filmed with a sense of constriction. Wide shots are rare. Instead, the cinematography favors fragmented perspectives, glimpses through shattered glass, partial frames obscured by smoke, handheld cameras shaking with panic. This deliberate fragmentation denies the audience the comfort of clarity. We are not given sweeping action sequences to marvel at. Instead, we are thrown into chaos, as confused and disoriented as the men caught within it. The setting of the robbery is not spectacle, but nightmare, an environment where every corner might conceal betrayal. Warehouses and industrial yards appear repeatedly, their vast emptiness echoing the hollow grief at the story's center. These spaces, with their concrete floors and rusting machinery, become metaphors for the protagonist's emotional state. Vast, cold, stripped of life. The camera lingers on these spaces with stillness, allowing their silence to press upon us. It is in such places that betrayal festers, where robberies are planned, where violence erupts. Critics often noted the starkness of these environments, some describing them as anti-glamorous. That starkness is the point. The film rejects aesthetic polish in favor of harsh reality. One of the most striking settings is the sequence in which the thieves plan their ultimate heist. They gather in suburban homes, spaces that should symbolize safety and domesticity. Yet the cinematography transforms them into dens of menace. The contrast is chilling. Kitchens where coffee is poured become sites of conspiracy. Living rooms where families should gather become war rooms of greed. This inversion, domestic space turns sinister, reinforces the theme of betrayal. Safety is never safe. Trust is always fragile. Even the most ordinary spaces can conceal violence. Lighting throughout the film becomes as important as location. Ritchie and his cinematographer adopt a palette of shadows and stark contrasts. Interiors are dim, lit by single bulbs or shafts of daylight filtering through grime. Shadows stretch across walls, swallowing corners, reminding us that the truth is always hidden, always partial. Exteriors are filmed with muted tones, skies heavy with gray. Even Los Angeles sunlight feels harsh, stripped of warmth, casting more menace than comfort. This manipulation of light creates an atmosphere where clarity is elusive, where every space feels unsettled. Symbolically, the fractured lighting mirrors the fractured timeline, reminding us that perception is always incomplete. Sound design intertwines with setting to intensify mood. In the Cash Truck Company, we hear the constant buzz of fluorescent lights, the echo of footsteps in corridors, the metallic clank of doors. These sounds create unease, emphasizing sterility. In the trucks, silence presses in, broken only by the hum of engines and the occasional static of radios. When robberies occur, sound shifts violently, gunfire layered with echoes, explosions roaring with guttural resonance. Yet the most haunting moments come in silence, when the world falls quiet before violence erupts. These silences transform spaces into chambers of dread, amplifying the fragility of routine. The film's fractured structure is mirrored visually by its settings. The same event, the pivotal robbery where the protagonist's son dies, is shown from multiple perspectives. One detail that critics often overlooked is how the film avoids iconic LA landmarks. Unlike many movies set in Los Angeles, there are no sweeping shots of Hollywood signs, no indulgence in glamour. Instead, the city is represented through its underbelly, industrial estates, anonymous suburbs, highways stretching endlessly. This decision denies the city its mythology and replaces it with a new one, an LA of shadows, a city stripped of its cinematic sheen. Thematically, this resonates with the film's philosophy. Permanence is illusion, glamour is a mask. Beneath everything lies fragility. The use of camera movement is another crucial element. Ritchie abandons his usual frenetic style of whiplash edits and instead adopts a slower, heavier approach. The camera lingers, drifts, presses in. Handheld shots are used sparingly but effectively, creating disorientation during robberies. Static shots dominate in quieter moments, emphasizing tension through stillness. This restraint mirrors the protagonist's silence. Just as he speaks less, but carries more meaning, the camera moves less, but resonates more. The visual language itself becomes an extension of character. Costume design, though subtle, also contributes to atmosphere. The guard wear uniforms that emphasize anonymity, bulletproof vests, neutral colors, indistinct clothing. They become interchangeable, almost faceless, reminding us of the disposability of labor in such industries. The thieves, too, wear tactical gear that erases individuality, reducing them to a machine of violence. Only the protagonist stands apart, his clothing darker, sharper, echoing his role as both within and outside this system. Costume here is not flourish, but symbolism, reinforcing themes of dehumanization and isolation. Even the way faces are filmed becomes part of setting. Close-ups linger on sweat, on eyes glistening in shadow, on bruises and scars. Wide shots are often avoided, keeping us trapped in proximity. This visual choice creates intimacy, forcing us to confront grief and violence directly. The human face becomes its own landscape, scarred and burdened, as telling as any city street. In the climactic heist, all these elements converge. The setting shifts between armored trucks, city streets, warehouses, and suburban hideouts. Each space becomes charged with inevitability. Cinematography fragments the chaos. Sound amplifies the dread. Lighting cloaks betrayal and shadow. The trucks once again become coffins, the streets battlefields, the warehouses tombs. By layering these spaces with dread, the film denies us spectacle and delivers suffocation. Critics who described the climax as relentless were responding not only to action, but to the oppressive use of setting and cinematography. By the time the film closes, we have traveled through a city stripped of glamour, through trucks stripped of safety, through warehouses stripped of life. Each setting has been transformed into allegory. The city is fragility. The trucks are coffins. The warehouses are grief. The homes are betrayal. The light is fractured truth. The shadows are memory. The sound is heartbeat and silence. Together, these elements create an atmosphere not of action, but of tragedy. The genius of Wrath of Man lies in its refusal to let setting fade into background. Instead, it uses every space, every shadow, every silence as narrative. The environments are not neutral. They're complicit, carrying the weight of grief, amplifying the suffocation of vengeance. The cinematography does not embellish but distills, stripping away glamour until only rawness remains. When we reflect on the film, what lingers is not just the protagonist's wrath or the thief's cruelty, but the spaces that held them. The cramped truck where silence suffocated. The warehouse where betrayal festered. The street corner where grief was born. The city stripped of its glamour, rendered instead as scar. These settings are as much characters as the men who move through them. And it is in this marriage of place and story that the film finds its deepest resonance, reminding us that environments are not passive, but mirrors of our own fragility, our own grief, our own inevitable descent into shadow. Behind every film that grips us with its silence, shocks us with its violence, or unsettles us with its grief, there exists another narrative. One lived in real time, not scripted, improvised by the men and women who make it possible. Wrath of Man may appear on the surface as a tightly wound thriller, a film of precision and cold determination, but behind the camera the journey was unpredictable, filled with odd humor, quiet camaraderie, logistical headaches, and those strange, fragile moments where chaos on set mirrored chaos in the story. To understand the film more deeply, one has to explore this second narrative, the behind-the-scenes insights that shaped what we eventually witnessed on screen. The first point of fascination is the reunion between Jason Statham and Guy Ritchie. For years, fans had speculated about when the two would work together again. Their early collaborations, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, had been iconic, defined by swaggering dialogue, absurd criminal antics, and kinetic energy. But the Statham who walked onto the set of Wrath of Man was no longer the cheeky hustler of the late 1990s. He was a global action star, carrying the weight of franchises like The Transporter, The Expendables, and Fast and Furious. The reunion carried nostalgia, but also challenge. Ritchie was now a different director, eager to strip away his earlier style and pursue something colder, heavier, more tragic. Statham was asked to embody silence, to act with stillness rather than banter. On set, the two men joked about how different things felt. Ritchie teased Statham that he had gone Hollywood, while Statham fired back that Ritchie had gone serious. But beneath the banter lay trust, built across decades. That trust would anchor the entire production. The crew often recalled the strange discipline of silence that Statham brought to his role. He had far fewer lines than in most of his films, and he leaned into that restraint with intensity. On set, between takes, he would often stay in character, avoiding small talk, carrying the heaviness of his role into the quiet corners of the studio. Some younger cast members joked that he was scary even at lunch. Yet, when the camera stopped rolling and the day ended, Statham would occasionally break the mood with dry humor. One anecdote recounted by Holt McCallany described Statham walking into the crew tent during a particularly long day of shooting and announcing in his deadpan tone, "They told me this film was called Cash Truck." Nobody said anything about emotional trauma. The crew burst into laughter, grateful for the levity. It was a rare moment where the actor's personal charm peeked through the intensity of his role.